Hey, in this video, I want to show you how to use an LFO as an oscillator. So we have these two jacks right here, and instead of them being assigned to the wheel and switch as sources, we can use any alternate modulation source instead. So I'm going to choose an LFO, and usually you can just patch an LFO anywhere you want to in any synth anyway, but the nice thing about the MS-20 is that we can take that LFO and actually patch it to the output. And if I hit a note right now, we can actually see the extremely low cycling of that LFO. So if I boost up the LFO 1, I'm actually going to switch it to sine since that's more pure. If I boost up the frequency to 99 plus 99, you can see in the manual that that's 32 hertz, but that's clearly not fast enough. So I'll need to use another alternate modulation source, in this case LFO2, to boost up the rate of this LFO. Oh, this is LFO3, my bad. Let me jump over to LFO1. That's why I didn't. There we go. Now you can kind of see that 32 hertz peak there. Again, switching to sine, and let me use LFO2 as another alternate modulation source. In LFO2, I'm going to switch to a square in stop mode. What this allows me to do is send a maximum voltage, use a maximum voltage source at note on. So this LFO is not cycling, it's just immediately sending this value, this full intensity value at note on. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put fine back down to 50, and now I'm going to put intensity up. And we can start to hear that LFO. And the video after this, I'm going to go into sample rate reduction, which will explain the aliasing going on with this LFO. Yeah, so let's try to tune it to oscillator 1. Let's go back to the patch panel, grab VCO1. This is the same thing that we did with the filter. So I just want this tone to be able to hear it so I can match it. So I'm going to play C4 again and jump back to the LFO. So you can see that's C4 right there. And now let's, oh, right there, 261, set 99, 50, 52 seems close, and 55 is where we get no cycling at all. So we have C4 down. Now we need to add pitch tracking on it. So we do that via note number usually, but in this case I'm actually going to use an AMS mixer because the intensity control won't be fine enough. So let me jump over to the AMS mixer. I'm going to do A times B. I forgot to reset that, but it's fine. Just choose A times B from the drop-down menu. And then I want LFO, or excuse me, envelope generator 3. No. What do I want? I want note number. Sorry, this got a little convoluted here. So yeah, I want note number. So that's what's going to create the pitch key tracking. And then I want the volume of this modulation source to be affected by envelope generator 3. And so if I go back to the LFO and I put this on 99, it's not going to do anything. I could play that octave above, and we can see that we still get this pitch down here, but we also get the octave above from the VCO. And it's not doing anything because I have the AMS, the sources for this AMS mixer don't have any intensity. If I turn up the intensity here, right now, with the way it's patched, it's the same as if I simply had note number patched in here and then was just turning up the intensity of note number. So you can see 82 is close, but then 83 is close as well, but they both still have beating going on. So you can tell that the frequency is not spot on, and that's where envelope generator 3 comes in. I'm going to grab envelope generator 3, and again I forgot to reset it. Basically all that I did was I put the values at 1, and then I have no attack or anything, decay and slope, these don't matter. I do have the release all the way up because since this is technically increasing what you can think of as the volume of this modulation source, I don't want that volume to decrease at note off, so I simply put the release all the way up. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, let's go back to our AMS mixer, and then this now is going to act as a fine control for this. So 50 seems to be stable. So now we technically have a perfectly key-tracked LFO. And if I disconnect all, I'm going to throw this back into the output. So we're using an LFO actually as an oscillator, and it is polyphonic. It sounds really bad because the sample rate reduction, the internal sample rate for the LFOs are at about 1500 hertz. And so, yeah, so it's a super, super slow rate. You can tell from this jagged waveform. I'm going to make a whole nother video about that in the next video. But yeah, now that we're here, there's like all sorts of things we can do with this, with all sorts of fun we could have. We don't just have to use it as an oscillator. We can, but the LFO itself has a few shaping tools. Like I could switch it to a triangle waveform, switch to a saw, switch to a square. So we get all these weird waveforms. And then we even have like offset controls, which are just going to introduce some clipping the other one way or the other. The reason for that clipping is actually because we basically have a ceiling for the MS-20. It wouldn't clip on its own like this. How do I explain this? When you use offset, you're actually just pushing the oscillator to one side and making it unipolar. But in this case, since we're at maximum volume at the output, we are clipping. It's kind of a little difficult maybe to understand without some illustrations or something, but we can also fade in the oscillator. It's almost like the oscillator has its own envelope. And then delay, which is kind of pointless. Yeah, so all sorts of cool things that can be had there. Technically, we could even do an FM between the LFOs. I mean, that's what this is. We are doing frequency modulation. And then in the patch panel, we can use this as a kind of FM source. So right now, we have, I believe I should have my, yeah, this is still key tracked and everything. Yep. So I'm creating an oscillator out of the filter, right? And I've now created an oscillator out of an LFO. So I'm technically not using any real, quote unquote, real oscillators. But I can still use these in an unconventional way. So I can patch this actually into the high pass filter frequency, and then again do FM. So let me disconnect this. And right now we would only be hearing the feedback of the high pass filter going through the low pass filter. But then we have in our intensity, we have our external modulation. So by turning this up, I'm technically doing FM. Like, I'm using a sine wave to modulate essentially a kind of like a low pass square wave. I'm using I guess you could say a sample reduced, sample rate reduced sine wave as an FM modulation source for a low passed square wave. So it's pretty interesting. Doesn't sound all that great, since it is going through a low pass filter. We can go to the patch panel and actually bypass that low pass filter. Just go straight to the output. So it sounds a lot like cross modulation. It's not going to sound like variable phase modulation. It's much too dirty for that. Sounds crazy. Wow. Technically still key tracked. Really neat. So I'll end this one here, and then I'm going to go into how I know that there is a sample rate reduction for the LFO. And yeah, cool.